At the Roundhouse, a same-day voter bill has gotten a due-pass recommendation from the House Voters and Elections Committee. The bill would provide for same-day voter registration and voting during the early voting periods. It's supported by a broad range of groups, including Conservation Voters of America and the AFL-CIO. A couple of bills under study by a committee in the State House tackle the question of the times an employer might steal money from employees. Not taking their purses or wallets. Instead, it's about unpaid wages. One of the bills deals with the amount of time an employee is allowed under law to file a claim for back wages. The second deals with what happens when an employer underpays overtime wages. Brant Milstein is a lobbyist working on behalf of the immigrant rights group Somos Un Pueblo Unido.
They're both anti-wage theft bills, and they complement one another. We would have done one bill, but it would have been a real big bill, so we broke it up into two. But both bills make changes to the Minimum Wage Act so that workers who aren't paid the minimum wage or who aren't paid overtime have an easier time recovering those wages that they, under the law, have to be paid. It's interesting, the strongest state that I know of is actually Arizona, which is surprising to some folks, but our neighbor has one of the strongest minimum wage laws in the country. And what makes it strong is that workers in Arizona, if they aren't paid overtime wages or if they're not paid the minimum wage, they can go and file a suit in the court on their own behalf, or they can go to the Department of Labor, and they can do that within 2 or 3 years of having had their wages stolen. The problem in New Mexico is that those workers have to do that within 1 year of having had their wages stolen, and they can only recuperate that 1 year's worth of wages. So a worker who had 4 years' worth of wages stolen can only get 1 year back if they file immediately. The change we would make is if a worker brings a case within 2 or 3 years, then they can recover all of the wages that they're owed. So there's a time limit as to when they can start their lawsuit or start their report with the Department of Labor. But if they get in within those 2 or 3 years, then they can recover everything that they're owed, which to us seems only fair. That, an employer who steals wages from a worker, we don't believe should be allowed to keep those wages. Those wages need to go back to the worker.
Milstein says the proposed legislation hasn't met any stiff resistance so far, probably because it's been written with input from both political parties. Nevertheless, a punitive element in the legislation holds some potential for opposition.
We haven't encountered opposition because we've worked closely with groups you would assume will be in opposition, and we've crafted the bills in ways that we believe are fair and the other parties believe are fair as well. Another provision that makes our law real strong that may bring some opposition is we are asking to amend the law to include what's called treble damages or triple damages. As the law is written now, if you don't pay your worker overtime and that worker sues you, they get double damages back. So you got to pay them what you owe them times 2. We're going to change the law to make that times 3. And the idea is twofold. One, there has to be a real deterrent so that employers make the economic calculation. I'm going to pay my workers overtime as I'm supposed to on the front side, because if they come back later and sue, I may be on the hook for triple damages. The other thing is that the law needs to reflect the gravity of the offense, in my opinion. I've had folks come into my office who weren't paid overtime wages or weren't paid minimum wages, and I help them as I can. I'll file a lawsuit for folks, but I've had to send people to the food bank in the meantime. So these are people, living on the margins, and if you don't get paid your $500, your $1,000 paycheck, it's a big deal. Kids don't eat, rent doesn't get paid. So we think those triple damages are important to send a real clear message. You got to pay these folks because they got to eat.
Francie Cordova is Director of Labor Relations for the state. She would be in charge of overseeing implementation of the measures if they're eventually written into law.
From our perspective as the enforcing agency, what the bills do is, one of them, Representative Garcia's bill, adds a retaliation claim for workers who have filed a claim with us and then have some sort of a detrimental effect in the workplace, demotion, termination, and that would remedy that because we'd be able to add that claim directly into the wage claim as well, at least an employee would. And the other bill, Representative Al Park's bill, has a variety of different things in it that would enhance an employee's ability to seek redress in court. But importantly for us is it gives us some civil remedies, some penalties if an employer just does not respond to our administrative attempts to collect the money or to hold a hearing. We often have times when an employer will just flat out ignore the subpoenas or ignore the hearing notice, and there's really nothing we can do about it until it gets to court. And that process can take, a year and a half. And so in the meantime, an employee is out their money, assuming their own money, and this would give us some civil penalties to address that.
Francie Cordova, the State Labor Department.